Hello and welcome to episode 209 of Page One, the Writers' Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us again on the podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And it is episode 209, so we have 208 other great authors or industry
Quick
experts.
maths there, Marco.
Exactly, yeah. I was able to do that maths in my head. So please do go and check out those episodes if you haven't already. We've got authors, screenwriters, comic writers, journalists, comedians, and as I said, lots of agents and editors as well. So please do check out the back catalogue if you haven't already. But this week we are chatting with another great author.
We are indeed. Mr. Barnaby Walter is our guest this week, who has written a number of novels under B.P. Walter. He's written psychological thrillers, but he's reinventing himself slightly as a horror author now with Scuttle, which came out just last month. Oh no, October. We're now
just into December now. Yes, indeed.
So Scuttle came out just in time for Halloween, and it's a really great chat we have with him. And he's got loads of really great advice for people who are looking to plan books out. He's had a job working as a social media coordinator for Waterson, so he has a lot of knowledge about how bookstores operate, how choosing books sit on which shelf, how that all plays into, people recommending which ones to buy when they ask people who work there, all that kind of things in the background that I always kind of wondered how that really works. He spills the beans, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, and also he's got a very interesting writing process as well, as we will hear on the podcast. So yeah, it's a great interview. Barnaby was great fun to chat with, so we'll get straight into it after a quick advert for a writer's notebook. Before we do that, though, I also want to quickly mention our Patreon, which you can check out at the link in the podcast description. You get lots of extra benefits if you want to support us there on the podcast. There's free notebooks, free books at the highest tier. You get a pin badge, you get a bookmark, you get early access to episodes, you get extra episodes. So please do check that out if you like the podcast and the content that we're putting out, because there are lots of benefits there, and it helps us to continue to make the podcast as well. So that's always important. But otherwise, we'll get straight into it, and we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy, and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
I always like to start the podcast with the same question, which is, did you always want to be a writer?
I didn't know, but I think I always knew I wanted to tell stories in some way, and how that was going to come about, I don't know if I was always sure. There was definitely a point when I was probably a young teenager that I wanted to become a novelist, but there were also other points that I wanted to either be a Disney animator, or an actor, or a film critic, or a filmmaker. So it was just one of many different jobs I think I fancied turning to potentially at some point in my life. I think it really became a serious ambition for me when I was coming to the end of university, or coming to the end of my postgraduate course at university, because I studied English and film at university,
Mhm.
and then stayed to do a master's in film and cultural management. And that was very much geared for me potentially to go into the film distribution and film marketing kind of side of the industry.
Right.
And
Yep.
I just knew that it wasn't a right fit for me. I knew that instead of packaging up other people's stories and trying to sell those, I wanted to write my own stories. And I did think about going into film production, but for that, you need a lot of other people's time. At home writing a novel, it's just your time and money that you're
Yeah.
using or putting on the lines. So I left. Once I graduated from my masters, I decided to just try it, and my parents were very kind and allowed me to write a novel. And I did work part time in a bookshop in East London while I was doing that. But I think that was probably the moment that I really thought this is a path I would like to follow.
Yep. So, just gonna ask, because A Version of the Truth is your first novel, which was 2019. But
Was
before that, am I right in saying you attended the Faber Academy?
Yes.
Which is I was quite interested in asking you about, because, well, I suppose, first of all, for those that aren't aware of what the Faber Academy might be, do you want to tell people what it is, and how it works?
Sure. The Faber Academy was a really wonderful experience for me. I believe they offer a variety of different courses at different kind of levels, and or with different aims in mind. The one I did was very much focused on novel writing, and
Okay.
it was tutored by the wonderful author Rowan Coleman, and she was so encouraging and such an amazing mine of information. She was a brilliant tutor, and basically we had a work in progress throughout the course. It was throughout the autumn in the lead up from September to Christmas, and we would do a little bit of our work in progress each week. And that little bit would do almost as homework, and we'd bring to the next session, would focus on a particular part of novel writing, whether it be about character, creating a scene, tension, these sorts of things. And on top of that, there was really important knowledge to do with the book industry, to do with how publishing works, to do with agency representation, what to expect
Mhm.
once published, that kind of thing. So I think there were lots of different really important ingredients that I found to the Faber Academy course, not just the craft side, but also the industry
Mhm.
side as well.
Yeah, because I think that's something that a lot of authors, you know, don't really understand fully. It can be quite difficult to find out the all the information you might want as an author, as an
Yeah.
aspiring author at that point, to
A lot's
know
very
how the
hidden and
industry
guarded, isn't
works.
it?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. A lot of it is, I think. So I can see that a course like that would be quite useful. Um, were you writing a version of the truth while you were at the Faber Academy, or did you work on that afterwards?
Yes, I was. That was my work in progress while I was at the Faber Academy. And I was very lucky that wasn't the first book I wrote, but it was the first book I um, properly, I think, got into um, a shape that I thought there was a real chance. I did, weirdly, the book that became my fifth novel, The Locked Attic, was the first book I ever wrote. And that
Okay.
sat on a hard drive from about 2014, 2015, all the way up until 2022 when it was published.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and so that was the first novel I wrote. I mean, it was heavily kind of remastered and edited and that kind of thing when it did eventually end up being published. But I'd already written that, and I'd tried to get a literary agent and hadn't succeeded by that point, which is why I decided to take the Faber Academy, because I thought, well, this is something useful, hopefully useful, that I could be doing while
Mhm.
I'm seeking agency representation. And I think what was really good about the Faber Academy course was that there was a whole week on applying to agents and getting those 3 chapters. It's normally quite often 3 chapters you're asked to send off.
Yeah.
It can vary, but as listeners will know, each agency has their own individual guidelines and that kind of thing that you have to follow. And I don't know if you found this, but I was always terrified at getting those wrong.
Yeah.
Um,
Just get immediately just like thrown off the pile. Like, nope,
Yeah,
1.5
exactly.
spacing, delete.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, you've submitted 3 chapters instead of 2 or whatever. But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, so I was really kind of forensic in getting that right, and also making those first 3 chapters as great as they possibly could be, which in terms of a thriller a submission, I think was making it as kind of gripping and instantly kind of something that hooks the reader in. And that was something that Rowan was wonderful at helping with. But yeah, I think that book was a great one to have working as my work in progress when I was there, because it really helped me shape it into something that I thought was a confident product, essentially, to go out onto the market with. And it gave me the confidence, I think, to do that maybe I didn't have already.
So when you go to the Faber Academy, I take it, did you have like a full draft of your book already done, or was it kind of part written, and did you finish it during the course?
It was part written, and I finished it after. Some people, I think, had a full manuscript. Others had only just started. I think it varied. Yeah, I think mine was probably about half of the way through, and it didn't really matter as to which stage you were kind of up to. But yeah, I think I was halfway through and knew, or hopefully felt that this might be the one. And it's hard in retrospect to kind of give oneself that confidence, because you're still full of doubt, I think, and at that point, but at least I was. And I think that some of that doubt is useful, but some of it you have to end up getting over. And I think the course was really helpful in helping me kind of get over that doubt and being quite sure that it was something I wanted to do and hopefully would eventually get there.
Yeah. And did you find an agent while you were on the course, or how did that work?
It was almost exactly a year after. I finished what would become my debut novel, I think probably about 4 months after the course, so probably in the April following Christmas. And then I got my agent the Christmas that came after that, so it was about a year after the course. And that was a kind of probably an 8-month process of submitting to agents, and some people came back straight away with a no, others came back or asked for manuscripts, or some took ages to reply, of course. But at the time, it's such an excruciating wait, and you're refreshing emails all the time and just hoping for the best. But it turned out brilliantly, and I got my wonderful agent Joanna Swainson, who's my agent today, and yeah, it was wonderful, and she's been great.
Nice. And what was your the 7 books you've written under your BP Walter name, starting with The Version of the Truth up to The Garden Party, which came out in July this year? I would call them, I suppose, psychological thrillers as a kind of catch-all genre. And is that a genre that you really enjoyed reading when you were younger? Is that did you always think this is the kind of books I want to write?
Yes. When I was younger, I don't think I knew that's what they were, because I was a real fan of authors like Ruth Rendell and her under her pseudonym Barbara Vine when I was a teenager. I think I just thought of them as crime novels. I don't, particularly it's because Ruth Rendell wrote police procedurals as well. And I think during that period, or at least when I was reading, there wasn't as clear genre distinctions as there are now. Things just kind of just went into crime. And I remember being drawn to the more standalone books that weren't dependent on the series format. I read a lot of police procedurals as well, and I loved them. I particularly loved police procedurals on television. But when I was reading, I loved the standalone psychological thriller. And even with Agatha Christie as well, she wrote some amazing standalone psychological thrillers that weren't part of her Poirot and Marple novels. And I remember being drawn to those as well, the ones that didn't have a detective leading the reader through the story. So I think it was probably natural that I gravitated towards those. Also, because I mentioned I was working in a bookshop, I was very much exposed to the books that were quite big at the time, and I was really captivated by some of the big psychological thrillers. I mean, back then it was probably towards the start of this new wave, around the time of when Gone Girl was published and The
Yeah,
Girl on the
yeah.
Train, or a little bit before that, S.G. Watson's Before I Go to Sleep. So there were 2 or 3 really big standout psychological suspense novels that shifted the dial, I think, across publishing. And I think it changed publishing, really. And I think we're still seeing that today. And I think those were really important in crystallizing, for me, the genre I wanted to write in. And
Okay.
I mean, at times with my books, I'm quite often trying to nudge the parameters of where I see that genre going. And I definitely wouldn't want to sit down and feel like I'm having to write the same book again and again. But I think they fit comfortably within suspense fiction, which is a broad church anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you say that, but your latest book, Scuttle,
It's really nudged it.
seems to, yeah, it's really nudged it. It's nudging it very much towards the sort of horror side of things. I mean, and it's being published under a different name as well. Is that a deliberate distinction from your previous 7 books?
Yeah, Scuttle was a bit of a wild idea I had about 2 years ago. And this wasn't the first time an idea that had come to me that had a horror quality to it that I thought, oh gosh, I don't know if this is going to be possible. And that first happened to me with my second book, Hold Your Breath, the book that ended up being my second book. And with that, that was a psychological thriller that had elements of horror within it, whereas Scuttle is more of a horror novel that probably has elements of the psychological thriller within it, which is a subtle kind of change around. But Hold Your Breath was sort of my first practice in the horror genre. And when I originally had the idea for that book, I didn't know if my then publishers were going to want to publish it because I worried it was too off genre. But we found ways of making it work, and we kind of upped the crime element within it a bit more during the edit. And it's still a psych suspense novel, but there's a terrifying, like, scary woods setting. There's exorcisms. There's all kinds of stuff that happens in that book. And when I had the idea for Scuttle, I knew this one would be even more in that arena than that book. And I kind of knew this would have to be a separate thing, that this wouldn't quite work as a B.P. Walter thriller, because all the B.P. Walter thrillers generally happen in the real world, whereas this one contains massive spiders. And thankfully, we don't yet live in a world where they are rampaging around us. So I knew this would have a fantasy element, and that would probably require a slight tweak of the name. And that came about from this being a separate deal with my publishers at HarperCollins. And we agreed Barnaby Walter would be the best thing to publish this under, because it's still my name, the same as B.P. Walter is still my name, but it just creates a bit of a divide that's helpful for readers to kind of indicate that this isn't quite the same sort of.
It's a divide, but also I suppose it's not in a way, so those of you that might want to follow you, those of your readers that might want to follow you over can still see it's you, but there is a distinction there, I suppose. I mean, I'm interested because when we've spoken to other guests about sort of shifting genres and stuff like that, sometimes that isn't always welcomed by others in the publishing industry, like editors or agents and things like that. I mean, was your agent quite happy when you said, I want to write a book with giant spiders, or did she think you were mad? What was the reaction there?
I was very lucky that my agent she loved the idea, and she's very happy to try something new. She's very encouraging when it comes to that. If I had been insistent that this was going to be a inverted commas B.P. Walter thriller, I think I probably would have been met with some there probably would have been some questions, and I don't know if it would have really gone anywhere, because there is reader expectation when you've authored a certain amount of books in a certain genre, and I can understand that. And I was very happy for this to be a separate project. In fact, I envisaged it right from the start as a bit of a separate project. But as you say, hopefully with some carryover. And which I quite like as well. And I mentioned my second book, Hold Your Breath, is set in a scary forest, and Scuttle is set in the same scary forest as that book in Hold Your Breath.
Okay.
And
Oh, nice.
all my books connect together in some way. They're all standalones. Everyone can read them separately, but all of them sort of bleed in and out of each other, including Scuttle. So I kind of enjoyed bringing it in to the same world whilst also keeping
into the Walter verse.
Yes, exactly.
That's actually what one of my past used to refer to it as.
I'm always quite interested by author names, because there's always that part of me that thinks, but I don't want to start again from scratch, and I've built up this readership of readers. I want to bring them with me, but then if it's, as you say, there is that expectation of what they will get from a BP Walter book, and if it's not that, then do you run the risk of annoying them? So I suppose you've done quite a nice job of keeping it, drawing a line in the sand, but a very kind of faint line that it's obviously kind of still you, but it's just it's like a nice change. So it's quite a nice kind of halfway house, I think the way you've done it. I'm looking at all your books. You've written a number of books since in the last 5 years, 7 books, 8 books, I suppose now. Sorry, from 2019 to 2024. It's a high output of novels. That's a couple a year in a lot of cases. What's your process there?
Yes, I know it's strange when I look at it, and I realized the other day that I'm currently on track for 5 books within a 2-year period, and
nice.
which was fun when I kind of thought about doing that, and then I'm now on my 3rd or 4th structural edit of the year so far, which can be tougher work than expected, but I don't really know. I think some of it happened by accident, because just by kind of the way things ended up working out. So I was with a different publisher, or a different imprint than who I'm currently with at HarperCollins. And I had the book that was supposed to be my second book didn't work for that publisher, so it ended up being shelved, which at the time felt like a really kind of terrifying situation. But it ended up working out quite well, because my current publishers ended up acquiring that book, and it became my 4th book rather than my second. But it was quite good to be able to go to them with 2 or 3 books already written, and which enabled us to do, I think we did 3 books within a year and a half, and that only really became possible because I already had one kind of shelved at the last minute before. So some of it's happened that way, and like I said earlier on, my 4th or 5th book, I lose track of the numbers, was the very first one I wrote about 10 years ago. So I think it's generally happened because of an accident of scheduling, rather than me necessarily deciding to do a huge amount. Having said that, I do write full time, and this being my job, it's within my interest to keep writing as much as possible, because it's what I do for a living. And if my process and timing enables me to write more books, I'm very happy to do that, because I have so many ideas. I couldn't imagine not having enough ideas to write novels. And I have purposefully upped the amount that I'm writing in the past few years, simply because I've had the time to do so. So it's something I love and enjoy. And if I could do 12 books within a year and keep the quality high, I would do it. But I think that would probably topple me.
But when you say it's your full time, and I totally understand you want to get as much done as you can and everything like that. But what does that mean in terms of your daily writing? Are you writing 9 to 5? Do you have a word target? Is it a certain number of hours you want to write every day? How does that work?
I don't usually have a word target, provided I kind of keep an eye out on the little counter on Microsoft Word by how much it's going up by, and as long as I've got a sense that it's steadily creeping upwards, I'm mostly happy. Back in the summer, I had to write a book quite quickly because of a change of schedule, the way the books were coming out, and I did start to set myself targets, which I've always been reluctant to do so, but ended up quite enjoying, trying to see if I could write 2,000 or 3,000 a day. But that wouldn't be my default way of doing it. Normally I just I just like to have felt like I've made progress, whether that progress be
Yeah.
1,000 words or 4,000 words. I don't hold myself to it too much, but I generally enjoy it enough for it not to feel like a chore, or as if I'm having to kind of push myself along to do it. And I've kind of, ever since I started writing, I went full time about 3.5 years ago, and during that time, I've kind of curated my day and my process to the best possible way to make sure it's conducive to that. But I say that, I am guilty of occasionally procrastinating on Instagram or whatever, but most of the time I'm writing the book because I'm very much in the world of the book that I'm writing.
Yeah. So do you split your day then? Do you kind of have like a writing bit and then like an admin bit or something? Is that, do you split it like that at all?
I normally start the day with the writing, and well, that's a lie. I normally start the day watching a film or something on TV. My partner leaves.
It's a very nice way to start.
My partner usually goes to work quite early in the morning, so I usually watch an episode of a TV series, then go for a run and listen to an audiobook, and that I just find gets me into the right sort of zone, and then I'll probably start the writing in the morning between 9 and 9:30 a.m. And once I always have the TV on when I'm writing. This is something that disturbs some fellow authors of mine, but I always choose the films and TV shows that I'm going to have on in the background when I'm writing every day.
Because is the volume up?
Yeah, and usually, yeah, not thunderously loud.
Madness.
Are these things that you've seen before, or
mostly? Yeah. Uh-huh. It would occasionally, if it was something fairly low taxing, I could do something I haven't watched before.
And you're still able to write with. I feel I would just get sucked into the TV and I would just do nothing but watch whatever old episode.
Yeah, no, I need the TV on, and I need movies or TV shows playing while I'm writing.
Okay,
I used to. I've got a friend of mine who does this as well, and we talk about it quite a bit because I used to feel like this meant I wasn't actually a proper writer. I was just kind of like skipping, playing truant, and in the end, I just realised that this was just part of of my process. This is just the way that it kind of takes my brain into an area that it feels capable, comfortable to write in. But if I'm doing a really difficult editing bit and a really difficult bit, particularly something that's very kind of language based or something like that, I might hit mute. But it's only muted for a minute or so. Occasionally I do audiobooks as well. Occasionally I have like a classic novel on, like a Charles Dickens or a Bronte or something playing in the background.
So is it stuff that's related to the theme or the topic you're writing?
No, I've been writing
below decks on the background and just writing your dark.
I wrote a lot of Scuttle with Hallmark Christmas movies on in the background. Or I might be writing a book that's very nice and have horror movies on. It's just
So is it like is it a kind of background noise to help
sort of
you?
like a white noise.
Like a white noise, exactly,
yeah. It's very much like that. And if it wasn't movies, I would put like rain sounds on or coffee shop sounds on, but which I do very occasionally, but normally it's films.
Oh, that's interesting.
And for someone that has this very structured way of organizing their day and stuff, for the actual stories themselves, are you a planner? Are you a pantser? How do you approach your stories?
I plan really meticulously, and this might be something that harks back to the Faber Academy, because we kind of experimented with ways of working within that, and I really was drawn to the idea of planning out a book chapter by chapter, and it's something I've always done with every book. And the very first thing I do is get the characters nailed down, which normally means creating sort of a cast list of all the characters, and I go looking for pictures of either actors or well-known people and put their faces next to the names. And whilst I kind of like this idea of fantasy casting as if it was already a TV show or something like that, it also really helps me if the characters end up changing names, and because I don't know if you find this, but they quite often in my manuscripts end up changing names for some reason or another. And it's helpful in my head if I can be like, oh, that's Colin Firth or that's Kate Winslet, but, rather than thinking, oh, did I call her Jessica or was she? So I find that can be useful. But once I've got that, I'll lay out the entire novel in a chapter by chapter synopsis. Sometimes I'll do a shorter 2-page synopsis before that, particularly if there's a key complicated twist in there that I'm worried I'll forget. I'll write out the book very briefly, and then I'll do the chapter by chapter plan, because that can take weeks or months. But once I've got that, I'll then save the book onto my laptop in one of my kind of folders for planned but not written books. And it might sit there for a year or 2 years or maybe more. But as long as I've got it captured, I feel happy that it's there.
Yeah,
and then when it comes to choosing the next book to write, then I can go through it. And I just use it as a map and a guide really for when I'm writing, and I highlight the chapters as I write them. And I don't write them out of order as well. This is something that I do that I've occasionally had extreme reactions from writer friends of mine, but I sometimes write my favorite bits first because I find they just get me into the zone of the book. And I think those favorite bits are often quite emotive or powerful scenes, or bits where lots of action happens or important stuff goes down. And I think if that can mentally throw me into the world, that can only really be helpful for the rest of the book. And then I'll go through and kind of stitch those favorite bits together. But as long as I can see the plan starting to be highlighted, I'm happy.
I've not done that, but definitely sometimes if I feel that I'm stuck on a certain bit, it can sometimes help to sort of jump to the next scene that I have clear in my head. And even just, I probably won't even write that whole scene out, but I'll sort of start writing it, and then that helps me fill in the gap beforehand, kind of a thing. But not to that extent. But yeah,
this sounds absolutely insane to me. I mean, the Barnaby method is just put the TV on right wherever you want.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It just comes together in the end.
He's got the full chapter plan there already. So
well, I suppose that's a fair point. So yeah, so you're picking it. Yeah, it's not just totally, because I don't really plan that much. And I suppose if I tried to do that kind of jumping ahead, I feel I would just end up getting lost, and I wouldn't know how to connect up again, or I would end up with stuff that just felt wildly different, in tone or something. So maybe I should give it a try. Maybe I should try this. Maybe it's an excuse I need to watch more TV.
Yeah, that's what you need. Yeah.
Bad news. I've not read anything else, but I've watched a couple of really good seasons.
Yeah, some really good things on Netflix. I was going to ask as well, because you said you worked in a bookshop. I think I'm right in saying you worked as a social media coordinator for Waterstones. Is that right?
I did. Yes. Yeah. I used to work in the bookshops, which is how I ended up doing the social media.
I just wondered if that, working in that side of it, we have had discussions on the podcast before about don't write to market and don't chase the thing and stuff like that. But I wondered if working in a job like that lets you understand what people are looking for, and does that influence your own stories that you might tell, or the next one that you've already sort of planned out? You think, oh, maybe that one next.
Yeah, I'm always a bit hesitant about the advice of like don't write to market and that kind of thing, because I think that's probably true for something really specific. So if there was a sudden trend for serial killers that worked as butterfly catchers or something like that, and there was like 3 popular books to do with that, I'd probably be cautious to see whether that trend was going to carry on for years to come, because it's a really specific thing. And that is a very random example. If anyone's written a book like that, that's great. I'm not referring to anything specific. Maybe I'll write it now. But I think with really specific things, it's probably, I don't know, a bit difficult to follow that. But if it's something as massive as a shift towards a genre, like the current shift we're experiencing for romantasy or sports-based romance or that kind of thing, it's such a huge seismic shift in people's reading tastes. I would be surprised if it would vanish in a flash and someone would miss it. It's always a risk, of course, but as we said about the psychological thriller kind of resurgence when Gone Girl and The Girl on the Train came out, that's still going now, and it goes through kind of changes. There's different tropes that come forward and go back, but still the genre of psychological suspense is a very high powered genre, and I think it owes a lot to what those books did back between 2012 and 2015. So I wouldn't be too hesitant about the writing to market thing. And I think one of the best things that working in both the bookshops and in the head office of Waterstones doing the social media helped me with was seeing that dual process or even tension, to be honest, between what authors would regard as their art and what publishers or booksellers would regard as a product. And I think it doesn't always have to be a tension. The two things can marry up perfectly. And that in the best case scenario, it is a perfect marriage of the art and the product. But I think it helps probably take away some of the sentimentality that maybe I may have had about, inverted commas, the art, because in the end, that piece of art, if we want to think of it that way, will end up being sold in not just bookshops, but supermarkets alongside hundreds of thousands of other items. And to that supermarket is just another one of those products. So I think if one was to try have the best possible mindset of it, I think it's a balance of both. But I say that entirely realizing that it can be difficult to do that. But I think probably working in Waterstone's head office helped me get there to some extent.
Yeah, I find this whole thing quite interesting, the kind of interplay between art and commercial endeavours and stuff. And we chatted about it quite a lot in the podcast. We chatted about it with Lee Child recently, and he had very similar views yourself, that it is, it's a job and you're there to try to sell books and you're making a living off it, and you should never feel embarrassed or ashamed by the fact you want to sell this product that you've made. But I know a lot of people do feel like that, and I do think, it's art. It's not, you can't put a price in it. Or
I think it depends on what you're wanting out of it yourself.
Yes,
well.
I think that's it.
Like it's
right.
perfectly fine to write something that what you really want to write.
Oh, 100%. There's no right or wrong way of doing it.
Yeah,
for sure.
But
Absolutely.
in terms of like, if you want to make a living off it, then I think you have to have some eye to the commercial side of it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the tensions arise when the situation involving limited shelf space or limited resources becomes acute. And I think we're in a period now, or entering into a period, where the fight for shelf space and the fight for those bays in the supermarkets and the tables in the bookshops and that kind of stuff is becoming really difficult because it's starting to contract. And it's not starting, it has been for a number of years. And so I think that match made in heaven we talked about between the art and the product can become more strained the more difficult it is for that product to end up under the eyes of prospective buyers. I agree with the question, basically. It's the short way of saying it.
And of course, there's places like, I'm thinking of like W.H. Smith and stuff, where they're kind of the books that they sell, they're almost just like, am I right in saying they have a chart, but it's essentially just paid for by different publishers who, it's not like a chart based on physical volumes of books sold. So it seems like different places have
they
different
almost
metrics.
make the market
They
themselves.
almost make the market, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a very different. How would you even get into that market as an author? You have no real, I guess, say in some places of where your book's being sold.
Oh, absolutely. You don't really have any say at all, of course, and it's so much out of your control, and it's really hard. I find the lead up to each book, and I don't know if you have this because I know variety publishers do it differently, but as you approach publication day, you'll get kind of the retailer buy-in numbers and details of which shops, if you're lucky enough to have shops and supermarkets and that kind of thing, which stores will be stocking at, how many of those branches will be stocking at, how many of the books they'll be buying. And it's quite frightening, really, to see quite starkly printed in numbers how many books will end up on publication day being on the shelves. And it can be really difficult, and I've had books that have had really good starts and then the sales haven't been as good for that one, or I've had ones that didn't look like they were going to get huge numbers and then really took off, and it's totally out of the author's control. I think once you've sent over the manuscript to the editor, there's not that much really you can do to influence anything really that happens after that.
It's a very strange industry in the sense that, publishers, agents, publishers, editors will all sort of have a view on, this is going to be huge, this book, this is going to be the next big book. But really, once it's put out there, there is no control over it. And some books that have
Yeah.
had huge marketing spends behind them, they can try and tip the game in their favor, I guess. But some of them just disappear, whereas books that have had
Yeah.
no marketing go, go viral, get picked up everywhere. So it just in this whole talk of should you write to market, I think all you can ever do is give yourself the best chance by writing the best book that you can, but also what is it that people are reading, what are they enjoying, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, you haven't, as you said, you've got no control over it at the end of the day, nor does anyone else really.
The whole massive marketing spend, which leading to zero sales type thing, I find that fascinating, because I always think if you throw enough money at something, even if it's not that good, if it's everywhere in the public conscience, if it's on the tube stations and etc., you would think that would push through to even people just picking up something for gifts, etc., even if they haven't read reviews or
I think
whatever.
that might have happened
quite
in the
interesting.
past, but I think there's just too much choice.
I think there must be. Yeah, I think there probably is. Maybe I get people who are more discerning about their money. Maybe things a bit tighter. They don't want to spend without knowing for sure it's good.
I think the more one spends on a book, the goalpost for what is a success has to change, of course, because then you need to recuperate. So I think there are probably some books that do very well, but then aren't perceived to have done very well because the amount of money may be spent on the promotion and marketing, or the time spent of getting it to the on what they call the routes to market and things like that. So it's I imagine it's a very difficult balancing act for publishers to try and work out how to gauge a success, because one book's success in another author's numbers might be an amazing life-changing moment, and to someone else might look like something very disappointing, which is a shame really if it ends up working out that way. But it's I suppose that's the nature of commerce and products and things like that.
But I mean, I suppose linked to all of that, yourself, Waterstones have been supportive of your work. You were picked as a book of the month with the dinner guest. Did that, in your experience, did that have a discernible impact on the success of that book?
Yeah, I think it was a really important factor in that book's success. I kind of see what happened with the dinner guest was sort of one of those perfect storm situations where it was kind of like a domino effect of lots of different things that started to happen all at once. And it was almost like someone else had taken over of my life, because nothing like that had ever happened with my previous two books. Although I think part of the dinner guest success was owed probably in some way to Hold Your Breath, my second novel, because by the time that came out, my then publisher had already decided not to renew my contract, and I was looking elsewhere. And I can't remember if I'd already signed with my current publishers or if that was soon after, but we were kind of in the depths of the first lockdown. It was April 2020 and that book came out. And I think it was probably about 4 or 5 weeks into lockdown. So all the bookshops were closed, and I'd seen kind of retail numbers being reduced because there was nowhere to sell them. And the only place it was available really for people to see in the flesh was in supermarkets. And I was very lucky that it was chosen for Firm Britain's book club, and which was with Tesco. Tesco have a book club with Firm Britain, and it gave it just something extra. It gave it a really good kind of prominent space on the shelf. And even though there was no discoverability in bookshops, it gave it a push of discoverability that was really helpful during that time. And it sold way better than my debut. And so when it came to The Dinner Guest coming out, which was my first book with my next publisher, with one more chapter, I already had quite good track in terms of supermarket sales for my previous book. So Tesco were really supportive of The Dinner Guest and went big on it from the start. And I think Asda did as well. And we got the news of the Waterstones Thriller of the Month choice. So there's I started seeing things that I'd never really experienced before, like Tesco orders that I'd never seen in that quantity. I don't think I'd had Asda before that, or maybe in a small amount for Hold Your Breath. And I hadn't had a Waterstones Book of the Month at that point. So that was an amazing and very big new thing. So it was all these things that started to happen. And then I think Sainsbury's came on board a bit later on. And as the ball started rolling, we realized that this was changing the game of how we thought this book would go. And I I kind of knew, as it was starting to happen, I kind of knew that it couldn't not have a huge effect on my career, because
Yeah.
things were just, I don't like to say going out of control, because it was a wonderful thing. But whilst the, any negative parts of one's career are sometimes out of one's control, sometimes the positives are also out of your
Yeah,
control.
yeah,
And they
absolutely.
just come about because, out of, luck of the draw or the circumstances. But I was just really lucky that some wonderful people in various parts of the book industry decided to kind of take a risk on that book, and my new publishers, and they published it brilliantly. And I loved the package and the cover that they came up with, and it was an amazing kind of moment. And I think another part of the story that I think was probably quite important is that it came out 2 weeks before lockdown eased. So about 2 weeks before all the bookshops reopened. And there were lots of people, I think, were probably quite hesitant, me included, that people would be really worried about going back to bookshops, that they would be hesitant and would probably stay away. But the opposite turned out to be true. They ended up, I think, having footfall similar to like a Christmas kind of amount of people buying books, and people just poured back into those shops. So I was really lucky that The Dinner Guest had just come out, so it was on all the tables, and particularly in Waterstones, with it being a thriller of the month, had really good prominence within those. So the timing, I think, was really important as well with The Dinner Guest. And I think there were a crop of other thriller writers like me that were really helped by people going back into bookshops and browsing and getting recommendations from booksellers and things like that, as people rediscovered that love of browsing in shops again. So yeah, I think it was a whole kind of constellation of really wonderful things that happened with that book.
I wanted to ask about for those that might be interested, when we talk about like the Waterson's thriller of the month, what does it actually mean? What's it? How does that? What actually happens to your book if it's chosen as a thriller of the month?
Well, it means that every Waterstones will have it in good quantities, which is something you can't with any retailer, any bookshop or any supermarket or wherever. You generally can't presume that it will be stocked in any of the shops, let alone every single branch of that particular retailer. So one of the best things about it is that it means that it will be in every single Waterstones, and not just in every single Waterstones. It means that the booksellers will be very keen to recommend it as well to people coming into the shop, because it's the thriller of the month. They are eager to introduce people to the read that they want to really kind of recommend that month. And the booksellers at Waterstones are really wonderful, because they get behind the books of the month in an amazingly enthusiastic way. And I think the hand-selling aspect of what Waterstones does for their books of the month is really magical, because I think everyone loves a recommendation of going to a shop and people are saying, you must read this is really good.
Yeah.
And the booksellers get advance copies so they can read and recommend the books that they're talking about. And I think it's just something that just focuses a reader's attention. When you go into the shop, you're confronted with thousands of different options, and it's something that basically says to a reader, have a browse, but while you're looking, we really recommend this title in particular.
Yeah.
And
you see it in the window quite a lot, don't you? Kind of, I've often seen of the month highlighted, or the kind of what the book of the month is, with a cool kind of loads of copies in the window display of nice kind of setup, which must be quite a nice boost as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think what every book needs or is looking for really is reader discoverability. And I think the best thing about the Waterson's Book of the Month slots, they've got fiction, children's, non-fiction, thriller, and now sci-fi and fantasy. And I think they help fans of those genres go into the shop and look at what book's been selected for that month for that category. And I think it's a quick way of them thinking, oh, here's a recommendation, I might be really interested in that, and then adding it to their hopefully very large stack of books that they're buying from that bookshop.
And so you've got Scuttle coming out, which, as we've discussed, is a slight more lean into the horror side of things. Is that something you would want to continue exploring? Different emphasis on your stories, or is it a sort of one and done as far as you're concerned?
No, I would love to. I would really love to write. I am halfway through another horror book, but I have so many commitments in the BP Water thriller area of things. I don't quite know when that one will surface, but I also it hasn't been announced at the time that we're talking, but I think by the time this podcast goes out, it will be, because I think it's being announced either this week or next week. But I am doing another pseudonym sort of horror, sort of a gothic horror thriller that's coming out next year under a completely different name, called Medlock, which is a kind of a psychological thriller or a gothic thriller reimagining of The Secret Garden, with elements of Rebecca and The Turn of the Screw as well within there. And that's coming out autumn next year. And it's been something I've had to keep quiet about for so long, and it's nice that it's now being announced, and I can finally mention it. But
brilliant! What's the name for that using then?
I'm doing under a pseudonym under the name S.G. Hartnell. So it's a completely separate pseudonym, and that's generally because I'm doing it with another publisher, and I wanted to keep it very separate to my my books that I'm doing as B.P. Walter and Barnaby Walter. And it's kind of like the middle ground between the two, really, because it's not horror as in full-on fantasy, but at the same time, it's not a psychological thriller in the same way that The Dinner Guest or the others are. So it's kind of a middle ground, and we decided to do it as a separate name. So I'm doing that. I've just finished the edits on that, and I'll have another psychological thriller next summer. So at some point there'll be another Barnaby Walter horror. I'm just not quite sure when.
Brilliant. Obviously, you started off kind of thinking you're going to go into as one of your many options was film. Would you ever want to just go back to that area and maybe work on a script or something like that?
I don't think so. I mean, I never want to say never, but I never even tried to write a screenplay. And I think I liked the idea of filmmaking more than I would have done the actual practice of it. I think in the end, you find that you know what it is that you want to do, and I'd gravitated towards the writing and the novel writing rather than towards being on the set of a film or trying to write a film. And again, I wouldn't want to say never in a million years, because there might be a circumstance where something might intrigue me or a project might come my way or something like that. But at the moment, I love writing the novel so much. I can't imagine anything very soon taking me away from having my kind of focus on that.
I mean, it sounds like you've got a whole hard drive of plotted out books there, so there's plenty to be working on, I think. Anyway.
There are a lot, yes.
What was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read, I'm about to start a really good looking proof called The Midnight King. You may have heard of this.
I heard that's rubbish, actually. I've heard that's rubbish.
Which you're very kind to send me, so I'm looking forward to starting that. I've just read Alan Hollinghurst's latest book, Our Evenings, nice. Which is very good. And even though that's not a thriller, it's a very interesting book for thriller writers, because he really plays with the non-linear narrative, and at least a lot of psychological thrillers quite often have non-linear narratives. And I think the more writers read how other writers do these things, it can only help. And I really enjoyed seeing how he did that. He kind of slips through time within that book and follows one character through the journey of his life. And I've also just read the second of Frida McFadden's The Housemaid series, The Housemaid Secret. Which has been a phenomenal success.
Those books are massive, aren't they? They're huge.
Absolutely huge, and I really enjoyed The Housemaid. I've read loads of hers, a lot of her standalones, but I'm steadily working my way through The Housemaid sequence, and I've got the last one, which I think is called The Housemaid is Watching. I've got that one to read as well. So nice. I'd recommend those.
Cool. What about the last film that you watched? And I mean, I actually sat down and watched, just didn't have on as you were writing a book.
Actually sat down and watched. I think would have been last night. I watched Addams Family Values, the second.
Oh man, I haven't watched that since I was a kid.
Because I'd never seen the sequel. I'd only ever seen the first one.
That's the only one I have seen, actually, randomly.
Oh, really? Yeah. And I think it's even better than the first one, actually. It's a superior sequel. But I watched that because it's perfect for Halloween season, really, those nice. Sorts of things. And I very
Is that the one when
he gets married?
Yes, Fester gets married.
Yes.
There's a woman trying to kill him off and she keeps
Yeah.
trying to kill him and he won't die. Yeah.
Yeah, Kieran Cusack, I think, is the is the woman.
Oh, is it? Okay. Right,
Yeah.
Good cast in those films, actually.
Yeah, it's terrific. But that was the perfect kind of Halloween weekend to watch. So I'm in full horror Halloween mode at the moment. So, or every day scary films.
And what about a TV show? What last TV show you've been watching?
I've just finished the most recent series of True Detective, the one with Jodie Foster.
Oh, I've not watched that. Yeah.
Which is really good.
I really liked it. Yeah, it got a lot of bad press, but I thought it was really, really good.
I think actually it's my favourite of the True Detective sequence of standalone series. It really reminded me of a Sky TV show called Fortitude from a few years ago.
Yeah.
Similar, that kind of
very similar
Arctic setting. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly, and things in the ice and that kind of thing, and also Christopher Eccleston. And when he turned up, I was like, "Is this a deliberate kind of reference to Fortitude?" Him being in both of them. I really enjoyed that, and I've been rewatching all of the TV series Jonathan Creek. With Alan Davis, and because I loved that as a child. I probably watched it way too young. There's heaps of stuff that I watched probably way too young that ended up leading me to become a crime writer. But it's been fun going back and watching that, and all of Silent Witness as well. I've been going back to watch.
Oh yeah,
because that started on TV when I was like 5, and I definitely wasn't watching it then. So I've gone back right to the start, and I think mostly almost there, but it's been going for 26 years, so there's a lot to go through.
That's nuts. Good effort. Well, the very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, and as you'll probably know, there's no right answer here apart from one, and obviously you know what the right answer is, but we'll get to that. But we'll start off with psychological thrillers or horror novels.
I would usually read psychological thrillers.
Cool.
I would probably normally watch the horror.
Okay.
Nice.
That's a bit of a cop out. I'm sorry.
Right. It was novels was the question, so we'll take
novels. Yeah. So psychological thrillers. Yeah.
TV or cinema?
Oh, again, that's such a difficult one. I'm really rubbish at this quick fire thing, but they blur into the same thing for me. I think movies are my main love.
Cool.
So movies, but normally at home because I have a better screen than quite often the projection standards that you do.
Night owl or early bird?
Again, I'm awful at this. I'm both. I'm the kind of person who stays up quite late and wakes up quite early. But, yeah, no. I mean, I try to get 7 hours, but I don't work early in the morning. But I do like waking up early because I feel like you start the day well. So I'll go with the early morning.
Nice.
I mean, I would normally ask music or no music when you're writing, but we've already covered that you go a step further. A fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Takeaway.
Nice. And
Domino's, hopefully.
The last but most important one, paper book or ebook?
Oh, physical book every time. I do sometimes read proofs digitally because it's helpful for authors and publishers, but I do much prefer physical books. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, fair enough.
Excellent. You've disappointed Tarek with that. You'll have to give him a nice
blurb now. Yeah, 5-star review, please. I feel much better.
Thanks very much, Barnaby. That was a lot of fun and really interesting as well. So
that was great
thank
fun.
you for that.
Thank you so much.
Well, yeah, that was a really fun chat with Barnaby, and I mean, loved hearing about how the bookstores worked, loved hearing about his planning process, but I have to say, the man sits there and writes with the TV on and blaring in the background. I cannot get my head around that. It's absolutely mental to me.
Yeah, the only other person that I think that has had a similar process, if you want to call it a process,
was Ted Bundy.
was R.J. Barker, if you remember, when we
did
interviewed him. He, I'm sure, said that he has Marvel movies on in the background. I could be misremembering, but I'm pretty sure that's what he said as well.
Maybe that's where I'm going wrong. Maybe this is how I get on through my backlist of TV shows.
Yeah, exactly.
And get more writing done at the same time. So it's I like it.
I suppose, yeah, I was going to try and justify it there, but I can't really. But you know, when you're writing, you concentrate fully on something, maybe for a sentence or two, then you sit back and think about it, and maybe at that point you get distracted by the TV, and then that puts you
My worry would
back. And
be,
I don't know, yeah,
maybe it's
I'm
a
not sure it
passive
worked
thing.
for me.
Maybe it's a
Yeah,
passive thing because, like, I
I think it
suppose
must be passive. Yeah, yeah.
my issue with like distractions is that they're often things that I am choosing to look at, like it's
Hmm.
social media or it's
Yeah.
The Verge or YouTube, whatever. I'm mucking about and looking at stuff. Whereas I suppose if it's just passively there, maybe it's
It's like listening to music, I guess,
yeah, it
but
is listening to music. Yeah,
in the same way that I don't really like to listen to music with words when I'm
yeah,
writing,
I agree
the
with that.
same
Yeah,
thing would apply with TV. But anyway, it obviously works for Barnaby.
yeah.
So
That's the main thing is it works, and there's
yeah,
some
exactly, and that's
fantastic.
it. That's what we've learned on this podcast over 209 episodes: is that whatever works for you, that's the important thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe give it a go. If you're looking for something to help you break that writer's block,
Writer's
maybe
block,
that
yeah.
is the way. Maybe that is the way to do it.
To
But yeah,
be
thanks for coming on, Barnaby, and we'll put a link in the podcast description so you can pick up his books. But next week we have another great guest on the podcast.
We do indeed. Coming to join us for episode 210 is Joe Callahan. Joe is the massive debut success smash author 2024 of 2023
Trademark.
of yeah, In the Blink of an Eye was her big big launch, which happened in 2023, and it is, as a fantastic read, it is a kind of procedural crime sci-fi mashup about a cop who is paired up with an AI partner.
Very
And
topical.
very topical, and really that kind of that trope, that kind of like a buddy movie, like two people put together who don't get on and learn to get on by the end of
Alienation
it, and
type thing.
alienation, exactly that, all that kind of RoboCop, and that kind of mismatched,
Yes.
setup. And it's a really good reading. It was a massive book. It won the New Blood Dagger, the Crime Writers Association Awards. It won Theakston's Crime Novel of the Year at the Harrogate Festival. It was a Sunday Times bestseller. So huge book. And really, really great chat about how she came to writing, and what it's like to have your first book be that kind of huge.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, no, it was really good fun chatting with Joe. So please do tune in for that one. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on your favorite podcast app, as that helps us to continue to get great guests. If you are listening to this or watching it on YouTube, then please do leave a comment down below as well, and we'll try and get back to you. And if, as I mentioned at the start as well, we do have our Patreon, so please do check that out. There's lots of great benefits there, and it helps support us and helps us to continue to make the podcast.
Yeah, and if you would like to get in touch, as always, there are a myriad of ways to do so. You can drop us an email, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk. You can send us a social media message. We're on pretty much all of the social medias. Just search for @UKPage1. Drop us a YouTube comment under a video. Yeah, we'll pretty much take anything, really.
We'll take any communication, as long as they're nice. If they're not nice,
As long as they're
then we'll
nice,
just
yeah.
delete
Don't
them.
send us crap. I really don't want to see horrible.
Yeah,
If you don't like
exactly.
us, just don't tell us. It's fine.
Yeah,
Tell
exactly.
other people, whatever, but you don't need to tell us
Yeah,
to our face.
we don't need to know that. We don't need to know that.
I
Our
already get
egos are
myself as it is.
fragile enough as it
Yes.
is. Exactly. So yeah, but otherwise, have a great week, and we will speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here, or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening, and join us for the next episode.
See you later.